Hi everybody, Richard Tromans here again at Artificial Lawyer TV. Today we're talking to Mark Cohen, who runs Legal Mosaic and also is a well-known writer for Forbes magazine. And in fact, if you haven't seen him on a video or some kind of virtual event in the last couple of years, you've probably been living under a rock. Anyway, nice to have you on the show, Mark.
Great to be here with you, Richard.
As you've probably figured out, Mark is based in the US, but he also travels a lot. He spent time in Singapore, in the UK, many other countries, and we're just going to sort of have a bit of a chat about what's going on in the legal market, particularly what's happened in this terrible year of 2020. So let's have a look at some of the sort of positive developments. So deregulation in the US, very few people believed anything substantive would ever happen, but we've seen some interesting things happen. Arizona, for example, and other states nearby. Is that actually going to turn into anything real? And do you think the key states like California and New York, where the vast majority of big commercial deals take place in the legal sphere, is that ever going to really change?
Well, let's start with the headline, and that is it's encouraging. But I would say, Richard, from my point of view, the re-regulation of those states that you've mentioned is a good first step. But the reality of it is that it's already a tale of two marketplaces. In the corporate legal marketplace in the states, already effectively, the boundaries between what are engaging in the practice of law versus what is delivering the business of legal services have blurred. It's really only in the retail sector of the states that the specter of unauthorized practice of law is ever raised. Consider that LegalZoom, probably the best of the law companies in that space, which now has millions upon millions of, I might add, very highly happy customers. Their net promoter score is many times greater than the whitest of the white shoe firms. But they had to successfully overcome, I believe it was a full dozen, it may now be a baker's dozen, of different states filing claims against them for unauthorized practice. So the reality of the marketplace is in the corporate sector, it really doesn't matter. However, I think that to your question of is it going to be adopted, these changes adopted by the larger states like California, New York, Florida, Texas, I would defer to my good friend on your side of the pond, Crispin Passmore, whose tentacles have, well beyond the UK, to the states. But my view is that already there is some encouraging sign from California. It's actually spreading to New York, maybe soon to other jurisdictions. I think you're going to, in the next few years, see a more widespread re-regulation of the US legal market for sure.
Okay, optimistic. And just one point, I mean, from our side of the pond, in the UK, I mean, the funny thing is that aside from enabling the big four, it hasn't, from what I've seen, I don't know, well, some people might disagree, but I don't think it's radically changed anything. Law firms being able to list on the stock market hasn't made them more innovative. Legal groups which have been bought by supermarkets, which are as retail as you can get, haven't radically changed the way they sell their services or reduce their prices significantly. So I'm a bit dubious about deregulation's impact. I think it's an extremely good thing and I totally support it. But
well, let's put it this way, Richard. I have for a long time said that I have ABS envy. I think that ABS, forget about the results that it either has or has not obtained in connection with the UK. I just think as a construct, and if you read, as I know you have, the Clementi report, which of course gave rise to the Legal Services Act of 2007, and you look at the problem it was designed to address, I think it's done a relatively good job. Could it do better? Perhaps. But I think that in the States, really what we're talking about is the reality of distinguishing between the profession and the business. And the profession of law is like, take medicine. Medicine used to be synonymous with the delivery of healthcare. Now, medicine is just a small but highly significant portion of healthcare.
Indeed.
That's sort of more of the way I would conceive law's future.
Absolutely. I mean, to some degree, you could say we're already there, even in the US, which is, a restricted market in many ways. I mean, look at Elevate and, a whole bunch of ALSPs and law companies. I know Elevate likes to be a law company. I mean, effectively, these are doing legal services without getting into the regulatory trap.
Absolutely.
And there's just, and then you've got all the, effectively, you might say, online information services. I mean, they're not giving advice, they're providing information.
Right.
You've got Joshua Browder and Do Not Pay, who's doing great work on the consumer side. And the whole consumer rights thing is an interesting thing because there's not many lawyers involved in many of those online gateways.
Yeah.
Yet they're effectively doing legal work.
Well,
and
what we're talking about here, Richard, I think it's a footnote to this larger issue, which is, law has always been what lawyers decreed it to be. And legal services were, as lawyers define them, not as what other providers in the marketplace might define them. And if you just look at, the statistics of, how is the legal industry performed in terms of providing accessible, affordable services, look at the data in the States. 85% of Americans who need legal services as individuals are effectively denied them because they can't afford them. They, and the whole process is shrouded in mystery to them. Even though, as you know, lawyers, when they enter the bar, enter into a social compact that says that they're going to defend the rule of law and serve society. But if 85% of individuals are effectively denied services and 67% of American SMEs are in the same boat, how can you possibly say that the regulations are serving anybody except for lawyers?
Well, indeed, and not to be picking on lawyers, professions in general. I mean, let's look at the medical profession in the US. All the doctors swear a Hippocratic oath, I will do no harm to my patient. And yeah, you might be in a small private hospital, you might be in a rural area, and someone with weak insurance turns up on your doorstep. You operate on them, and they are effectively bankrupted and driven out of their homes because of a surgical procedure. That's pretty mad, isn't it?
Yeah, but for all of the faults of healthcare in the US, I won't speak to NHS, but you look at the US and you say to yourself, as bad as it sometimes is, nonetheless, virtually 100%, not 100% certainly, but closer to 100% of people who need acute medical care are going to get it. Whereas in law, that is simply not the case, not even by any stretch. So law can and must do better. And in my mind, regulations have got to be revisited from the perspective of what is the ultimate objective that we are seeking. And that is for everybody to have reasonable access to affordable legal services.
No, I totally agree. And absolutely. I mean, the point about what does society want? And then let's work backwards. At least, I mean, law firms are private businesses. There's a limit to what you can do there. But in terms of regulation, re-regulation, etc., absolutely. But let's move on. Just briefly, in terms of the US and the UK, the largest legal market by a long margin, and then the second biggest legal market in the world, the UK, which is like that and that, but still with a second, I guess. There's a lot of legal tech activity, a lot of legal innovation and so forth, like in the US. If you had to say there was a difference, maybe there are no differences, would you pick up on anything? Are there any distinctive differences?
Well, my friend Richard Susskind and I, as you may know, did a series called The Uncertain Decade, and that was one of the topics that we talked about. And
No.
where we kind of came out was that each side of the pond had different incremental things that they're doing better, and then flip it around on other things. I don't think that there is an enormous difference in terms of what's going on between the two markets. I think that at the end of the day, the success of legal tech, to me, is going to be measured in terms of its ability to address our first topic, which is, to be able to, for those who already have access to legal services, to make them better from the end user perspective, and from the vantage point of those who are lacking access to legal services, the extent to which legal tech is going to be able to broaden the tent and allow those in need of legal services entry into that tent. I think that's really the ultimate measure to me of what matters. And I think there's much improvement to be had on both sides of the pond.
Yep, no, well, definitely. And as mentioned, our system is not perfect by any means, even with all the deregulation. Talking about regulation, that leads us to governments. As you know, and I'm sure a lot of readers of Artificial Lawyer have seen, the UK government and the Singapore government have both gone completely bananas around paying for projects, giving just literally cash grants to legal tech companies and law firms to play and develop new tools. They've helped to set up bodies like the Law Tech panel and so forth, all kinds of things, all kinds of projects. The MOJ is constantly talking about legal technology. I mean, huge amounts of government intervention in a benign way. And yet, in most parts of the world, you don't see that. And you don't see that in the US, even though the US has got way more money, you might say, to splash. They can really splash the cash if they want to. Do you think that, is that just a cultural thing, that in the US, there's just such a strong divide between the law and the government that, they don't want the government to get involved? Or is it, I don't know, is it a culture around, private business and do it for yourself? I don't know.
Yeah, well, let's start with Singapore, jurisdiction that I'm quite familiar with, and then the UK. I think that there is a definite view of the government that this is, number one, it is important for the rule of law that people have access to legal services. And to the extent that we can do things during a time of crisis to be able to help to promote access, that's a good investment. And I think it's also both Singapore and the UK recognize that these are fairly significant industries. That, for example, both of those jurisdictions are two of the largest, alternative dispute resolution centers in the globe. That means that it's good business. They're going to lose that edge if they don't have leading technology to be able to make it even more accessible and attractive and effective and efficient. So I think that it's a very pragmatic a view of a very important industry. In the States, I think, frankly, lawyers have become such a punching bag for the government and in the eyes of the public that there's absolutely no appetite whatsoever for propping up the industry.
Right.
And that's the way I would see that.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's not that they can't do it, or that there isn't perhaps.
They choose not to.
Yeah. It's just not palatable for US government hands out $100 million to law firms or legal.
And by the way, Richard, to that point, there was David Boies Schiller's law firm. It was reported in the New York Times recently that they got a $10 million bailout from the government. And you can only imagine the tsunami of very harsh and, dare I say, well-deserved criticism that the firm received. That's where, bailout money was going to, as opposed to some little mom and pop shop or bodega, in a city where people were literally out on the streets. That's kind of, I think, the perception in the States. Lawyers have plenty of money to fend for themselves.
But the legal tech companies, I mean, there's a lot of small startups who are doing great work in the US who perhaps would benefit from a bit of government funding.
It's certainly true, but I think that also there is, in my humble opinion, I think that there should be more consolidation between and among those companies. There should be more collaboration between and among those companies. And I think there should be a little bit more thought in terms of, is this something that we really should be doing on our own, or might we be able to partner with somebody else? So I think you're going to see a bit of a thinning of the herd, whether or not the government injects money into these companies, or whether the marketplace just at the end of the day puts the thumbs down. So I don't mean to be harsh, but just to be
Darwinian, yeah.
Right, but just to be practical about it. And I think we are living in a very Darwinian marketplace. And I think you would agree with me on that.
Yeah, no, it's tough out there. Although strangely, every single week I seem to write 2 or 3 stories about startups who are just getting tens of millions of dollars of funding. So some of them are getting it right. Clearly, some of them are getting it right. Let's move on the subject of legal tech companies. Last thing, really. It's been a very interesting year for a number of reasons, and there's a lot of stuff that we could rehash that other people have talked about. And let's not talk about how the pandemic has shunted digitization forward, because I think that's generally accepted. But more broadly, have you seen interesting developments in technology or areas of technology that really stood out this year?
Well, if you ascribe to the late Clayton Christensen's notion of disruptive innovation, and that it generally emanates from sort of the bottom and goes up. I think, to me, there's always been a lot of interesting action in the so-called retail segment of the legal marketplace. More of individuals and SMEs. And so you had mentioned my number one pick for a company that I think is really making great strides, and that is Joshua Browder's Do Not Pay. Which, for those in the audience, and I suspect most of the audience would be at least somewhat familiar with them, but started out with parking tickets, and then has kind of migrated up the complexity chain, and a suite of well over 100 different products, legal products, that have I think a bundled rate that would probably cost you a little bit less than a mocha latte at Starbucks per month, but does do things like help people in the States navigate through unemployment claims in 50 different jurisdictions. So that would be, sort of if I had to think of one off the top example of a company that's really making a difference in people's lives for legal tech, that would probably be my number one choice.
Interesting. And I think the interesting thing there particularly is that the technology is not complex.
Right.
This is not using some fancy GPT-3 super duper language model or blockchain or whatever buzzword, etc. It's just pretty standard tech. It's his business model, actually.
Right. It's in the business model, and it's in the use case. That I think Joshua has done a fabulous job of looking at really identifiable problems at scale that could be addressed without the need of licensed attorneys.
And interestingly, he's done all of this, as far as I understand, without getting slammed by the bar.
Right.
I don't know if that could be wrong. Maybe he has been, but as far as I know, he's got through this.
Not that I'm aware of. Haven't spoken to him recently. Haven't seen anything to that effect. But I think that is also coming back full circle. And I know we're going to close in a moment, but to the whole notion of regulation. And I think there will come a point, and maybe we're fast approaching that tipping point, because to my knowledge, the state bars were 0 for 12 in terms of attempts to say that LegalZoom was engaging in the unauthorized practice of law by what were ultimately products. I think maybe we've reached a tipping point, at least in the States, where there is a recognition of the distinction between a product as well as engaging in the service of delivering and practicing law.
Interesting, yeah, and absolutely. Well, perhaps we can do this another time. The productization of law, absolutely, and that interesting friction between providing actual advice in a very human level.
I am all for the productization of law with certain parameters, of course, attached to them. But I think that is definitely part of our future, and I look forward to being invited back.
No, well, my pleasure, and it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, Mark. And just before you go, are you feeling optimistic about 2021?
Well, hopefully it can't be too much worse, can it? But yes, I am. I still have retained a modicum of boyish enthusiasm. And before signing off, Richard, I'll say Merry Christmas, a safe and happy New Year to you and to all your listeners out there.
Thanks, Mark. Same to you. Thank you.